So I've shared before that I am not as much of a social justice pastor. There are some pastors that it just seems to come very naturally to them to kind of notice things that are taking place in culture and society and to really, focus on them. And it just it doesn't come as naturally for me. But the older I get, and I think the more I'm trying to pay attention to God and things happening, there are sometimes topics where I feel like I need to address this from a biblical perspective. And I want to talk this morning about what's become known as the Me Too movement. Really, sexual harassment and abuse of women. You've, I'm sure, seen the news reports as I have, just how prevalent. And of course, this has always been the case that women have endured with this. What's seemed to have changed is a culture where this is pointed out and lifted up, just how common this is and how difficult this is for women. I remember seeing a list a while back with 60, 70 guys. Some of them I didn't know of, Broadway directors, but others very, very prominent, and just how difficult this is. And so I've been kind of paying attention to this, and I wanted to wrestle with this from a biblical perspective. You may wonder why I've chosen to do this on Mother's Day. Mother's Day is usually one of those, hey, yeah, kind of cheery and light, and I know this is a more difficult and challenging topic. But this is also a day when we lift up, when we respect women. We remember the roles of mothers and women in our society. And I felt like this is a day to come alongside of and be in solidarity and support of women. I also wanted to do this morning because this topic hits very close to home for me. My own mom, when she was a young woman, before she married my dad, had an incident where she was attacked. And I asked my mom if it would be okay to share about this, just in brief. And, people always say they love their mom, and I love my mom, but there are those moments when you think, I really love my mom, I appreciate her. I asked her about this, and she said, if you think this will be helpful to anybody, then share my story. And so just in brief, my mom went out on a date with a guy that she didn't know very well. And they actually picked up some other guys along the way. And so it could have become a particularly ugly event. And then he drove to an out-of-the-way place, and he attacked her. My mom was so very fortunate that some folks came along in a convertible, and they heard her yell for help. And they stopped, and she was able to get in with them, and they got her to safety. But that we live in a world where this is so common, we're now beginning to understand, needs to change. And so I want to look at this again from a biblical story. It's found in 2 Samuel in the Old Testament. And it is, unfortunately, what I refer to as negative learning. We see in this Bible story what shouldn't happen. So again, in 2 Samuel, we hear, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David. Let me stop there for a moment. This is the same David of David and Goliath, or I referred to this David a while ago, David and the story of his best friend Jonathan. David, who is generally acknowledged to be the best king that the Jewish people had, but in this event is not. David is a man that is referred to in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. But this is a negative story, and we learn what not to do from David. So David sent Joab. Joab is his main general. With his officers and all Israel with him, they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. He should have been out with the soldiers in the field, but he stays behind. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman. We can hear this headed in the wrong direction. It was reported, "This is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." And that's where it should have stopped right there. But it continues on. So David sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself after her period. Then she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." So David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked Joab and the people how Joab and the people fared and how the war was going. He had to have some excuse for having sent for him, but his goal is to have Uriah come home, sleep with his wife, and hide what he has done. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." Uriah went out to the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, "You must have come from a journey. Why did you not go down to your house?" He's spoiling this plan that David has. Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah remain in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do such a thing." This is such an honorable man that because his fellow soldiers are out sleeping in the fields, he won't go and enjoy being in his own house. So then David said to Uriah, "Remain here today and also tomorrow, and I will send back." He starts to make other plans. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. On the next day, David invited him to eat and drink in his presence and make him drunk. "I'll get him drunk, and he'll go and sleep with his wife, and what I have done will be hidden." And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. So what is David to do? In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. Picture this for a moment. David writes a letter and gives it sealed to Uriah and asks him to hand it to Joab. In the letter, he wrote, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him so that he may be struck down and die." He hands Uriah this letter, the very instrument of his destruction. And that's what Joab does. And Uriah is killed. As I say, this is negative learning from David. I want to look at this passage a little bit more deeply and kind of wrestle with what we do learn from David in this story. And one of the first things is that David does not honor Bathsheba. That we are to honor women, and I'm speaking especially to guys at this point, to honor women. David could have looked at Bathsheba and said, "This is a child of God. This is one for whom God treasures, and I'm not to take advantage of her." But he doesn't do that at all. He looks at Bathsheba as an object of lust and acts upon that. We see him focus on her and then find out more about her and send for her. We learn from David that he should have honored Bathsheba. And I think even more so today as followers of Jesus. And again, I say this to guys, to look at a woman and see someone for whom God loved so much to send Jesus Christ to suffer and die for each and every one of us. If a guy would look at a woman in that way, this behavior that David was involved in would have changed. I heard something a little while back that I found very helpful, and I've kind of tried to incorporate it into my own way of thinking and action. I was on the 7 Mile Walk with Jesus retreat, a faith-building retreat, and they're divided, just guys and just ladies, and I found that the guys kind of get deeper and more honest on that retreat than maybe guys more ordinarily are. And a number of guys have shared that they wrestle with lust. And this one guy shared something that I thought, that is right on the money. He said that he was told and has tried to live, the first look from a guy to a lady is to appreciate what God has done, that God has made us attractive. He said the second look is as a guy to a woman. He said the third look, and each beyond that, is from the devil, or for sin, or for lust. That to just cut that off, David should have turned around and went about something else about his kingly duties, instead of having focused on Bathsheba and not honoring her as a child of God. And then a second thing we notice in the fact that he is the king. He has a particular position of honor, and he should have used that well. He's the king. He has a great responsibility, and he has a great privilege that was given to him by God. The stories that precede make it so clear that God had chosen him and given him this place of privilege, which he abuses by sending for Bathsheba. He didn't take well and use well what God had given him. And again, those lists and so many of those stories of abuse are by people who have positions of power and authority, and they misuse this. And this is a reminder for all of us, guys, and all of us, because in different seasons of our lives, we have positions of privilege. Maybe that is as a parent, maybe as an adult, maybe in a workplace, and we're to use those things well. That privilege that we are given, that David so clearly does not use well. And that leads us maybe to the third thing that we notice particularly in David. And that's that sin begets sin. His sin of lust and of focusing on Bathsheba then has her sent to him, and then she ends up getting pregnant, and then he creates this conspiracy to have Uriah murdered. And his authority, his position is compromised in this. Can you imagine what it was like for Joab to open this letter and to realize his honorable soldier is to be sacrificed on the battlefield? I'm sure at that point not knowing why. But then when he gets back to Jerusalem and finds that Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, has moved into the castle, it's completely clear to him what he was a part of. The servants know, and when servants know, I'm sure it's spread over all Jerusalem, that what David does leads to worse and worse and worse. And again, we see that so clearly now in some of the situations that literally from presidents on down have been affected by what they've done. I think about Bill Cosby in particular. I was always a huge fan of Bill Cosby. My dad had albums and old reel-to-reel tapes that I listened to him. I had his comedy routines memorized. I loved sharing that with my boys as they were getting older, as a prominent African American and as somebody who was always clean. When I was in college on Thursday nights, the dorms would empty into the common room for everybody to go watch Cosby Show. And all that stuff is ruined by what we now know is the behavior that was taking place behind closed door. Sin begets sin, and we see that so clearly in this story and in others. Well, I want to end this morning by wrapping up those two stories, at least some. So my mom got to safety by the folks in the convertible, and she immediately went and she told my grandparents, who believed her and supported her. My memories of my grandfather is as a kind and gentle Christian man, and he wanted to beat the snot out of that boy. Very uncharacteristic for him. My grandparents immediately went and confronted the boy's parents. I think now we would say that they probably should have taken a policeman with them as well. And I think about this experience in my mom's life, and she didn't refer to it when I was younger, but I think it was very much ingrained, and she raised me with a sense of respect of women that I didn't even know at the time that it was taking place, but I now realize that was a part of who she has become. And although I'm frustrated that this had happened, I'm glad that I was raised maybe in a culture of respect based on what had happened to her. And then the story of David as well. So as I mentioned before, the word surely got out about what David had done, and it came to the main prophet of the day, Nathan. And Nathan goes and he confronts the king. He actually tricks him into acknowledging what he has done. And it is well worth reading through 2 Samuel to understand what happens in this story. But Nathan confronts David, and David acknowledges what he has done. And in fact, the psalm that Christy read earlier, Psalm 51, is David's cry of confession to God, that he has done wrong. That he has betrayed the trust that God gave to him. And there is the reminder in this story that these things need to be acknowledged and our world needs to change.